As we escape the catacombs and rest at a nearby hut, Richard updates Asbel on the situation he missed while in Verona. That Cedric's representatives among the knights managed to turn enough of their number against the king that they were able to outright murder him. Even Richard's personal guard turned on him, leading him to flee, and thus, like the character XP costume I now have Richard in, he doesn't know who he can trust. Though Asbel has the childhood friend points to fall back on, and Sophie's completely innocent, that they get a chance to prove that they're not out to harm him.
二人とも急にどうしたんだ変だな今急に王冠が
But for everyone else from the capital, it's going to be a long climb back. Plus, even if Asbel had stayed with the knights, he's not the type that blindly follows orders and the royal family's higher on the chain of command. So he wouldn't have betrayed his oath to serve the crown and the people by protecting the rightful heir to the throne, as a usurper's commands are illegitimate unless they have a rightful claim to such themselves. That's kind of the thing I glossed over in the Code Geass reviews that comes into play by proxy and graces. At the end of Code Geass R2, where Lelouch took over the throne, while he had given up his rights to be in the Britannia's family's line of succession years before, the exception to that rule on that is if a member of the family successfully kills the current emperor. They are then rightfully and automatically crowned their replacement as having proven their strength over their predecessor and any other immediate heirs in the line. Yeah, that's an actual canonical law in the Code Geass setting. It's tied to all the Emblem of Blood stuff in the backstory, and was what caused the infighting over the crown that led to Lelouch's bastard of a sperm donor to even hold the position in the first place, as he orchestrated the death of dozens of family members that took it before he finally did. However, those kinds of succession laws don't exist in the Graces setting, so Cedric orchestrating his brother's murder is still treason. And beyond that, Richard is still the rightful heir, so the only way this coup succeeds is if Richard dies or stays in exile. For as the rightful heir, he can still gather allies and an army from Windor's various nobility-managed territories. Once more, launch would normally be the first resource tapped for this due to its proximity, but Aston's own actions made the primary consequence of all of its launch being allied with the very traitors he refused to speak out against through the proxy of Strahda's, Hubert's, command over them. Thus, as I've inferred, it's not perfectly like the series I am comparing it to. And Richard does confirm here that the Strahda alliance is all Cedric and Hubert's doing that he had no awareness of. So once again, this game confirms to me that Asbel was not ever the problem. The province they're headed towards, Gralesyde, is consequently their next best option, and the noble family in charge of it are Richard's cousins that, as far as he knows, are happy with their positions, so aren't likely to double-cross him to Cedric. It's just getting there while dodging the knights that is the problem, as Cedric's forces control all of the Wallbridge gatehouses between the various landmasses that make up Windor. Yeah, Windor's continent has a lot of wide lakes and rivers part of it, thus the easiest way to divvy up the territories for management is to divide them by the means that make travel accessible. Thus every bridge is itself a fortress to help maintain control over various regions in the event of, say, invasion. It's again why reclaiming the bridge to Fendel was so important. The landmass separation between the Windor territory and Fendel's is just too far to try and swim it. It is so restricted that military ships can't easily invade in that region without running into other defenses. That bridge really was the only logistically viable means of assault. And again, why I say that Aston blew the entire thing with them out of proportion, as Aston's brother died while he was on the other side of that bridge in Fendel territory. But yeah, the width of the rivers is the primary reason why we can't just go farther up or down the river or swim under the bridge. It's too far to be able to reach the other side without someone spotting them. And the sections of Windor they're in only has the sea to the east and another lake to the west, and are blocked by Verona to the north. Unless they get past that gatehouse, they're dead. Which is where the game's best character comes in for the save!
Hadouken!
I am not even kidding. This is Pascal, and she is an engineer that specializes in researching ancient artifacts and lost technology of the world, which includes the Valkanists. She hails from Fendel, and with Aston's nonsense happening, she decided to covertly travel on her own, found her own ways around the defenses of Barona, all with intent of ultimately finding a way to proactively fix the problem of her own Valkanists by observing the condition of the other ones, since all political means of exposing the problem of the Ellis shortage has been blocked. Pascal is a member of the Amartians, who originated as the engineers that actually made Ephinia a habitable planet hundreds of years ago when their main world Fordra began to die. Unfortunately, events throughout their history made it so that her people have lost a lot of the information they once had on the specifics of running and repairing a lot of the technology. So when you've got some that work and some that don't, it's a matter of observing what parts are functional in the working ones in order to figure out what to fix in the ones that aren't, if you even can fix or replace what's broken to begin with. And Pascal is one of the foremost minds when it comes to figuring out their lost technology. Unfortunately, Pascal is a bit scatterbrained, so invested in inventing and figuring out everything she can about the magic of the world, with science, that she's less than functional in all other pursuits, such as her neglect for personal hygiene. And it's probably because she's the dedicated magic caster, and also summoner, of the group that she knows enough short-term healing spells to not get sick from that. And as an additional plus to her appeal in this, her Japanese voice actress is Kana Ueda, best known for portraying the Tsundere Queen of Zettai Ryoki herself, Rin Tosaka from Fate's Day Night, as well as Hayate Yagami from the Lyrical Nanoha series, and Mii Konori from the Raildex series to show she has more of an appeal range than just Rin. Ironically enough, in English, Pascal is voiced by Kate Higgins, aka CC's actor from Code Geass. So it makes it even funnier that I still had Sophie and CC's outfit in their first encounter, as it's the superior version of the characterization, just plain blitzkrieging someone who voices the inferior version. Again, in the English dub at least. Why Pascal is my favorite character in this game is kind of hard to explain, but it's just her enthusiasm that ends up infectious, which ends up contrasting her against every other dour personality we end up recruiting, as she tends to remain optimistic that she can think of a way out of what they get into with science. And for the most part throughout the story, she tends to follow through with it. But among the cast, she's also the only one that doesn't have a Code Geass equivalent character that Graces has acting as an analog in its tale. So from some's view, it's possibly an example of what the writing could have been if the author weren't relying on crutches and hamstringing the story they wanted to tell, as Pascal just sits at an odd angle to it where she helps Asbel immensely in fixing what's wrong, while not herself acting as a hindrance, but instead means of enabling positive change. At best, the only Code Geass equivalent you might be able to pull out of her is if she were an amalgamation of the engineers Lloyd Asplund, Cecile Krumi, and Rakshata Chawla. But even then, the persona is distinct enough from all three that saying that of them is a particularly bad fit. Honestly, as I was playing, I kept mentally comparing her to Mei Hatsume from My Hero Academia, or Ed from Cowboy Bebop, as for some reason the Genki Girl engineer is a character archetype that just appeals to me. I'd probably get sick of them if they were taking up all of my time, attention, and energy in real life, and I have gotten pissed off at both real people and characters who have acted like this in the past. But for a game experience, and as long as they're not shoved to the foreground as the sole main character, I'm more than willing to play along with their act. Pascal was excited to meet Sophie, however, because she saw a girl just like her in the ruins that run underneath Windor's rivers, as they're access routes to the lower levels of the artificial installations that run throughout the planet. Of course, this lot doesn't know that as well, and Pascal doesn't think to explain it because she thinks everyone knows about this, primarily because she grew up in the Amartian enclave where such is common knowledge and thus thinks it's common knowledge for everyone, so doesn't think that they wouldn't know it. But consequently, those ruins are the way around the barricade to our progress, her taking us down there with the use of teleporter pads she has repaired. Unfortunately, the ruins are a progression-halting maze. I can't even really tell you how to get around them, as they're that in-depth and nightmare to traverse. So we're honestly just skipping around it. But throughout these paths, Pascal proves her worth in the party as the royal smart person that can help them utilize this advanced tech to their advantage, and allow them to progress. Pascal shows them the image she spoke of that looks like Sophie, such being a hologram on a damaged terminal, which unfortunately fails before Pascal can get anything out of it beyond the word Lambda. As I've already said from spoilers, Sophie is a biological android.
Androids?
Actually, the technical term is cyborgs.
Androids.
But she hasn't been here since the beginning of Affinia's terraforming. So the fact these computers down here, which have been abandoned for centuries, have data on her, is itself odd. And a plot hole, since, yeah, Sophie arrived on world long after the structure was abandoned. Like, maybe if she got scanned by a different installation on planets and that data got transferred here, it would make sense. But of the line she was produced from, Sophie herself is 100% unique in appearance. So we're not dealing with the doppelganger copybots problem. Regardless, Pascal's sticking with us, if for nothing else than to study Sophie. And with her staying, we retain all the tech advantages she can provide. She's literally a technophile. We make it to Gralesyde without any further interruption beyond Richard having another attack mid-trip that causes him to ultimately recoil from Sophie's touch again. The city's guards, shocked to see the missing prince, enter the town's borders, working to arrange a meeting with the Duke, which gives us a bit of a chance to recover from the journey and explore the town. Which is probably where I should talk about another of the game's mechanics, the Eleth Mixer. As the Eleth Mixer is, well, something I ended up underutilizing, as it acts as the party's all-in-one reagent-to-creation production machine. Want some food? Toss in the ingredients. Want a stronger statted weapon? Throw it in for the ultimate stabby +1. Have some gears and a gun you want to hand to Pascal so she's a better mage gunner? The mixer will act as the glue to call it steampunk. Which consequently makes it essential to collect the recipes to best use the mixer, and also to upgrade it. Fortunately, the thing improves with use, but the problem is it uses Eleth power to make things, and can only store so much. There's a variety of ways to recharge it, some of which is from battling. At other points, there's natural surges in Eleth it collects, but the best way to improve it is a bunch of key item books you find throughout the game that both allow it to improve Eleth regeneration rates, and permit the mixer to trigger special abilities, such as the one I keep equipped most of the time that allows it to randomly spawn various reagents, which are dependent on various criteria you set in motion. One of the biggest ones being that if you toss whatever reagent you want into it for a given time, it then gives the mixer a higher likelihood following that of spawning an extra version of that reagent. This becomes invaluable for increasing the acquisition rate of rare materials, as it means you just end up needing one of them before you can make more, albeit with the consequence of it taking more time the rarer the item is to create duplicates. But hey, if you're struggling to find something, then it's better than to have a long but guaranteed drop than, say, the Square Enix drop rate where a guaranteed acquisition means a 25% chance to drop. And it's helpful as well to go around to gather reagents and clone them when you can, as a lot of the major cities have quest dealers at the various inns we visit. And a lot of them are pretty easy, get this item for me from the wild style of quests that are a quick turnaround for the eagle-eyed item collector. The biggest merit to doing them being the skill points they award that help massively in leveling up character titles. Though some are a bit more fleshed out quests that we start accessing later in the game, which can reward a nice variety of items as long as one keeps on completion of the various quest lines. And as I inferred earlier, it's these longer side quests that actually tell you everything about how screwed up the story is with regards to its constant blaming of Asbel when it's his asshole father that fucked everything up. Of importance in the side quests right now, however, is Pascal's first summon, that is rewarded from a quest that has us take care of bandits and gives us the green crest that contains the summon and responds to her bloodline, as the summon spirits in the game are all ones that at one point helped maintain the planet's hardware that keeps everything functioning, but their purpose having been lost over time. Collecting her summons makes Pascal not just invaluable as a character, but improves her skill as a combatant, allowing her to be more than just a glass cannon magic caster, without her defensive stats lag behind the rest of the cast. Once that's all done, we meet with Duke Dalen, who is all behind supporting Richard against Cedric and his allied Strata usurpers, while also supplying us the logistical information they have about the state of Northern Windor, and emphasizing the danger to the nation's well-being for Lant and its Cheria supply to be out of their hands. But the only way back to Verona is either through Rant, which is a bad idea as they'd also have to defeat the forces there, which are more garrisoned than Verona's at this point, or go back to the wall bridge we just got around, which is also suicidal thanks to the defenses that are deliberately set into that installation. However, a small team can get inside the wall bridge thanks to the Amartian ruins, which has an additional teleporter pad whose exit is in fact inside the wall bridge. Get the team inside and they can open the gates and disable the active defenses on the southern side to allow the Richard allied forces through to swarm those garrisoned inside it. Or alternatively, Richard can confront the commander of the installation, reveal Cedric's treachery, and get even more personnel on his side if they're amicable and are able to understand that the right of succession falls to him and not Cedric. Though why would Richard be there to convince them on this infiltration mission when he should be leading the troops?
では、僕も一緒に行くよ。僕は自分の手でこの戦いを遂行し、勝ちたいんだ。亡くなった父上のためにも。
Because if the king does not lead, then why should the rest follow? After they complete laying out the plan, Richard can't help but feel guilty about dragging Asbel into this, despite him trying to convince Asbel to walk away. For Asbel's loyalty to him will inevitably draw him into conflict with the knights that he knows and trained alongside. But to once again contrast him against the Suzaku comparison, Asbel knows and understands that, walking in with his eyes wide open to the reality that people he trusted may be on the wrong side of all this. But that doesn't mean they can't work to convince them to join with them, instead, as long as they approach this properly and diplomatically, with humanity and not just authority.
俺はリチャードの剣だ。存分に使ってくれればいい。君だけに打ち明けるけれど、本当は僕は戦争などしたくない。それでも僕はこの道を選ばざるを得ないんだ。一日も早く戦いを終わらせて平和を取り戻そう。そのための手伝いなら俺はいくらでもする。ありがとう。
The next day, Gralesyde's forces are gathered, Richard setting off the army with a speech, as Asbel and co subsequently re-enter the ruins to get into the gate bridge, which unfortunately is an entire maze to traverse, with how it's laid out all across 3 dimensions, with you having to repeatedly go up and down different ladders to get to different sections of the complex, which has the various levers and pulleys you need to trigger to cut off reinforcements while opening the gates for your allies to get through. With the bridge likewise divided into north and south sections that have stopgaps against crossing between them beyond the bridge unless you want to end up facing superior forces in their rally points. Though admittedly, despite how much it frustrates me to actually go through it, I cannot fault how well designed that actually is. The place is deliberately made to make it difficult for infiltrators to get anywhere to sabotage the defenses of the installation. That is a good thing in universe to make it so frustrating, as the garrison stationed there would then have an easier time defending it from any infiltrators that might find a way in. Unfortunately, it's so good that once we get to one of the barracks' common areas, we end up ambushed, Richard taking a mortal wound.
やったやったぞこの手で王子をソフィー、パスカル、あいつを捕らえろ応援を呼ばれてしまうリチャード、しっかりしてくれリチャードリチャード
Okay, so it looks like he got Lelouch's invulnerability Gias from Nightmare of Nunnally instead of absolute command.
僕もこのゲスが貴様がしでかしたことの報いだ。その身で思い知るがいい。キャルカラーリチャード、もういい、やめるんだ。まだだ。こんなものじゃない。僕の受けた痛みはこんなものじゃないぞ。やめろリチャード、僕に命令するな。リチャード、僕は一体。ごめんアスベル、僕は君にこんなことを言うつもりじゃ。
To be fair, having your life flash before your eyes from a critical injury like that, only to be pulled back from the brink, that unsettles someone. But that is not the explanation for what just happened with Richard. Okay, so, remember during the childhood arc and that monster that attacked them? It has a name. And that name is Lambda, the creature alluded to in the data from the ruins. It is a creature from the planet Fodra that Sophie was explicitly created to hunt down and destroy. And it has been living inside Richard's body in the same way that Sophie stores herself in Asbel, Cheria, and Hubert. For this attack right here, where Richard almost died, well, he did die. It only being Lambda's power that healed him and brought him back. And in this moment of resurrection, was Richard weak enough to give in to the whispers of wrath Lambda has been planting in his head? Richard's outward persona, the one he's shown thus far and is at his strongest with Asbel, that is not a lie. That is the true him. But every time he's injured, the worst impulses that Lambda is planting in him take control, twisting him into someone else that might have his mind and memories, but in personality is an entirely different individual. A Julius Kingsley, if one will, to continue the comparison. And it's only because Asbel is there speaking sense to him and acting as his anchor to his humanity that Richard isn't being consumed by it now. And this isn't the first time one of Cedric's sycophants has succeeded in giving him a mortal wound. He's only survived everything Cedric has done to try and kill him thanks to Lambda. And Lambda has used each and every one of these opportunities to infest itself deeper and deeper into Richard's mind. It's telling him it can't trust anyone, that he'll always be abandoned by everyone and everything, that everything is out to get him, anything that may reach out is only to then be lost or done to them to take from and harm him in turn, and that he should retaliate in kind. No, more than equally, in excess and escalation, so they can never be brought to harm him again. Ironically, it's all because of what Cedric has done in usurping power that Lambda's become so active in Richard. Before this coup, Richard could force it down and resist, the guidance of his father and the familial connections he had being more than enough to prove Lambda's voice wrong. And that's why Asbel's so successful in suppressing its influence as he's doing the same. But the problem is Sophie. Because Sophie has been fighting Lambda for centuries, as even her touch can be painful to it and what it possesses. And Lambda is terrified of her. So its panic is making Lambda desperate for Richard to listen. But the twist of the story is, Lambda is not doing this out of malice. It's simply because that cycle of fear, betrayal, and pain that leads to the lashing out in wrath, it's all that Lambda's ever been allowed to know. Which is made worse in the short term, as it's revealed Asbel's mentor Malik is among those standing against them, which Richard sees as an even larger betrayal. However, after they're defeated, it's revealed that this is not personal. Many knights are merely doing so out of their believed duty to defend the country, as they're not aware of how the laws of succession in Windor work. Thus, they're not aware that Cedric's succession is illegitimate, which sometimes happens in civil wars where those caught in the middle aren't aware of where the lines should properly be. And when he's defeated and surrenders to spare any further harm to his men, and they were mistaken in their allegiances, Richard is stuck with a crisis. Lambda telling him to kill them all for raising a hand against them, but Asbel reinforcing the compassion of his humanity that these people are loyal to the country, and it's Cedric's lies that led to them deciding wrongly. Ultimately, Richard's true self forces itself through Lambda's influence thanks to Asbel, but the conflicts increasingly let Lambda have control over him. And it really is to the story's merit that they are drawing immense attention to this to show that there is some outside influence screwing with Richard's head.
卒業こそ叶わなかったが、もうお前は立派な騎士だ。殿下の力になって、この国を支えてくれ。
Once more, every person in Lant can go to hell. Though speaking of Lant, Cheria is here as part of a neutral group helping the injured amidst the battles. And the second she sees them, she ignores Asbel until she sees how dirty Sophie is.
あなた、髪が少しパサパサしてるわね。それに全体にホコリっぽく。お風呂はちゃんと入ってる？入ってない。この子の面倒、ちゃんと見てたの？
ほったらかしにはしていない。
They just traveled down a long, dirt-covered road, went down into dust-covered ruins, and fought through an ancient barracks where they had to maim several of its defenders. When does Cheria think they had time to wash themselves amidst all that? There's not exactly been an inn they could stay in to freshen themselves up before meeting you. This is one of several acts in the game that's supposed to frame Cheria as the team's mom, looking after all of them as her party role. But the consistent failing of her nagging is it is always out of context to what has been going on around them to once more facilitate the game's perpetual framing of Asbel in the wrong. And yet travel by foot in a setting like this, especially traveling and fighting as they have been, is going to get them dirty. And they have to be able to live like that between their capacity to even visit an inn to correct such. And thus, like I keep presenting, her positions are invalid and her hostility towards everything Asbel does is likewise so. Worse, in the time Asbel's been away to check on Cheria's well-being, only for her to bitch at him, Richard has had another one of his Lambda-caused episodes, intending to execute all the knights they've taken prisoner, and seeing Cheria as little more than a tool to keep his own forces strong.
王子に手を貸すような連中は全て賊軍だ。負傷しようと慈悲を与える必要なんてない。
彼らも同じウィンドルの国民じゃないか。
僕に敵対する人間など僕の王国の民ではない。
リチャード。
奴らは見せしめに処刑する。僕に逆らったらどうなるか思い知らせてやらなくてはね。しかも僕は奴らのせいで危うく死にそうな目にもあった。とにかくそういうことだ。僕が奴らを処刑すべきだと考えるのも当然だろう。
しかし処刑なんて考え直すんだリチャード。
まだ言うかアスベル。
彼らの意志で敵対しているわけではないだろう。恐怖で人を縛ることが上に立つ者のなすべきことではないはずだ。
Again, Julius Kingsley, not Lelouch in these circumstances. It's kind of hilarious as they were probably intending to tap the allegory of the Demon Emperor Lelouch stuff, only for like many to miss the intent of that. And for the later released Akito the Exiled OVAs, to, for all intents and purposes, cover their bases on that. Unfortunately, Dalen is a sycophant to the prince and unintentionally reinforces the impulses of Lambda. So while Richard has more than given Asbel permission to speak out as he wills to act as Richard's conscience, Dalen does not see it as such, and forcibly separates the two, which ends up being the final trigger towards Richard's following descent that colors the rest of the game's story. And of course for Cheria to bitch at Asbel for her perception of his decision-making despite her refusal to get the whole story and make judgments based on more than what little she knows.
アスベル、あなたも殿下が間違っていると感じているんじゃないの？
We use the catacombs to enter the castle unnoticed, eventually catching up to Richard, who is alone, the guards he brought with him having ended up slaughtered by the enemy, which in turn were then after killed by Lambda's power. The spasms he has afterwards showing just how much Richard's unknowingly become reliant on Lambda to even survive all of Cedric's attempts to kill him. Which really more than anything justifies his wrath when you realize that Richard has been suffering through this for 7 goddamn years, all because Aston refused to alert the king to his brother's treachery. We have to fight through the head of the Knight Academy who sided with Cedric, before reaching Cedric himself. And yeah, if everything I explained about later provided information wasn't enough, this is not presented as a feint. Richard didn't have a fit and kill his father while twisting his memories of the event to blame Cedric. Cedric really has been the one behind all the malicious machinations in the country. And now it's time for him to pay the price of his own greed.
ようやく王位を手に入れ、これからという時に。
王座は王を選ぶ。あなたは選ばれない存在だった。それだけのことです。死ぬ前に理解できてよかったですね。おじ上。おっと忘れていた。これは父の分です。これでやるべきことはやった。同じ場所で倒れた父の無念も少しは晴れるだろう。
What, did you think this would end if he were allowed to live? We're not dealing with that kind of story. Cedric has been working against the well-being of the country for over a decade. He had to die in order for other people to fix his damn mess. Richard is summarily crowned the king, this entire event now showing the infection of Lambda, which manifests as the redness of his left eye, which is barely visible throughout all of this. He generally intends to act as an honorable ruler, and as such he's done reasonable things and won't be executing the knights who sided with Cedric, merely stripping the commanders who were complicit in the treason of their service, as the commanders were the ones that led the coup to begin with. Though there will likely be some vetting of the others in hopes there won't be anyone seeking short-sighted vengeance. But with Barona back in order, it means the entire Windor militia is united under a single banner again, meaning it should be child's play to force all invaders out of the nation's territory and liberate Lant from Strata. Especially since, because of the Civil War, the supply of Elith crystals the country has is nearly exhausted, and their only means of resupplying their Segurite reserves had to be in the small territory the Lants controlled.
なんだってちょっと待ってくれ
This is what you were here for in the first place? The previous king turning a blind eye to everything was his fault. Aston antagonizing Fendel was his fault. Cedric's treachery allowed Strata to set up shop there, and the rest of the country is going to suffer if the land that is rightfully theirs is not returned. Moreover, they've already sent numerous messages to Strata that what they've done is an act of war on Windor due to the agreements with Cedric being illegitimate, as their agreement was not with the rulers of the land, but a usurper which occurred before he even took power. They have no right to be there, so them refusing to leave as they are now is not on Richard or his advisors, as Asbel suddenly proclaims it as. And really, this is the most Suzaku Asbel is like the entire game, in that he's blindly naive in all of these circumstances, when that doesn't make sense. This is what he came here for in the first place before he became aware of Cedric's machinations. And even before that, military assistance to help Lant was what he was trying to get when he first went back to Lant with Cheria after the time skip, which they didn't get because the coup happened at the same time. Now, he's finally getting what Lant needed in the first place, military intervention, and only now Asbel is seeing it as a bad thing? This really, in context to the character and the prior parts of the story, doesn't make any damn sense. Now, this is supposed to be part of the arc where Richard is being consumed in the madness Lambda is inflicting upon him. But frankly, this is pragmatism addressing the consequences of world politics when it comes to illegal edicts that mess up international relations. And while it is a good thing that Asbel is thinking in terms of what acting like this will cost the people in the short term, well, like his father in Suzaku, he doesn't really have a concept of long-term consequences yet. As if Strata maintains its stranglehold over Lant, then Windor will be reduced to the same shambling state that Fendel has been trapped in thanks to his father. Moreover, Windor wouldn't even be able to send diplomats to Strata to work this out with their heads of state, as the only port in Windor to Strata is the port town in Lant territory that is currently under Strata's control. Hubert's control. and Hubert is the one that is denying all demands for them to leave peacefully. So really, this is Hubert's fault that this escalation is occurring. Now the game tries to pass the buck on this later and make it so that Hubert's superiors were the ones that were refusing to leave. But remember from last time, Hubert was declared the supreme commander of the territory Strata claimed, so it's his decision to ignore demands to leave and justify it with an agreement that wasn't even worth the paper it was signed on, as it was done so without the authority of the crown. This is on him. And it shows how much Hubert grew up to be just like the man that abandoned him, who is blinded by his own hate, and belief that he is in the right. He's not. And as a consequence, his ego has been what's brought this to a head, for the Windor army proceeds to march on Lant. Asbel only just barely getting Richard to agree to let him go ahead of the army to try and convince Hubert to withdraw and spare everyone the conflict that will result from an unstoppable force meeting an unmovable object. He should have let him send him in as the commander of the army, as was Richard's original plan, as that way he would have had direct control over the army's actions. But unfortunately his protests against the entire thing, which again don't make sense because of the prior story points, got him demoted on that front.
肉親だからなんとかなると考えているな。血のつながりは往々にして情愛よりも憎しみを増幅させる。僕と叔父がいい例だ。君だって君をこんな境遇に追い込んだ弟を憎んでいるはずだ。
俺は弟との関係の改善を諦めてはいません。
So, here's my grand question for this entire storyline. Why isn't it Hubert that is possessed by this malevolent force instead of Richard? 'Cause that frankly makes more sense than Richard being the host to Lambda. Hubert has that hate and loneliness to harness into the powers of this entity. And worse, he has been explicitly abandoned before being thrust into a role that would allow him to rise and claim the power of a nation if given a chance, especially concerning his meteoric rise in the Strata military. This entity that is Lambda brings out the worst impulses of its bearer, and would make for a far stronger story for Asbel to be trying to save his brother from what is believed to be a malicious evil spirit than the guy he spent all of 2 days being friends with from all given evidence. Yes, it has the power of Asbel being Richard's first friend that works to try and bring him back from the brink, but a separation years long after a couple days interacting, even if it is memorable, no, that doesn't work as intended. Among everything else I have issue with in this game, Hubert's not being the bad guy is what I feel is one of the biggest mistakes, as it's easy to see him having embraced malice because of the abuse and abandonment he suffered thanks to Aston, and tricking everyone who abandoned him into siding with him while punishing his mom and making it so his brother he hates is left with nothing. That would make him empathetic, make him relatable as a villain, but that would require acknowledging something the game refuses to, that Aston is to blame for everything. I feel like I would enjoy this more if they would just do so, instead of presenting everything short of outright saying it. Because the reality is, even though Hubert ends up becoming a party member in short order, the brothers are never depicted as actually fixing their fucking relationship. All the game does is bend more and more and more over backwards to try and justify Aston's screw-ups, and every time it does, it actively makes the game worse.
彼は優しい男だ。彼の優しさは僕も大好きだ。
Violence is not strength. Compassion is not weakness. And yet this act is supposed to be a sign of Richard going evil and Asbel making the wrong decisions again, when it is fully in line with what we expected to happen hours ago.
どう思われますか？
もっともな考えだろう。ストラタが撤退すればウィンドルは落ち着くだろうしな。
Thus Asbel gathers his allies, plus Malik, who's also been discharged due to earlier but is someone Asbel feels he can trust, and Malik feels he owes a debt to Asbel for his prior failure, and also convincing Richard to spare him, and race back to Lant to see if they can't head this conflict off at the pass. And Hubert entirely refuses to listen to a damn thing they say. Estrada has not garrisoned them to be able to fend off the force of Windor's entire army. They expect the coup to succeed, and it hasn't. Holding this territory is a losing proposition that Hubert refuses to see, and because of it, the Lant citizens are the ones that pay the price, as the region is rightfully Windor's. Thus again, this is on Hubert. This is on Hubert that the Lant people were endangered by the two armies clashing. And yet what happens from that? Asbel is blamed for everything. Every single fucking little thing, which ignores both the mental illness that is comprising Richard's decision-making and Hubert's own inherited bullheadedness.
飲んでいない。
君が頼まなくてもランと侵攻は実行したい。
The largest part Asbel has in this that he can be blamed for is not taking command of the army when such was offered. But as said before, he is an inexperienced commander, which would be entirely wrong for that role, which would have only escalated tensions instead of acting as a diplomat as he attempted to be here. And Hubert's refusal to listen is not on him.
何か手伝うことはあるかな。
自分たちのことは自分たちでやれますから。肝心な時にいなくなっていたお方に頼るほど俺たちは愚かではありません。
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you forever. Fuck yourselves. Go fuck yourselves. You fucks.
バリーは俺が7年間オートへ行ったきりだったことも含めてああ言ってるんだろう。
I genuinely hate every fucking person in Lant, with exception of possibly Cheria's grandfather, as they are all collective shitheads acting as sycophants to the very people that are the cause of all their goddamn problems. But yes, the army invades, Richard spearheading it. As with Asbel away from him, Lambda's influence took full hold over him, and unleashed the full wrath of two people wronged by the world around them.
アスベル、もう一度聞く。僕の何が間違っているって。君は僕のことなら何でも理解してくれるんじゃなかったのかい。
力に頼り、恐怖で縛るばかりのやり方では何も解決できはしない。
Yeah, I really wish I'd been aware of when the cutoff for controlling Richard was in advance, so I could have swapped him out of Lelouch's character costume, which Richard is now stuck in for the remainder of the storyline where he is turned into its antagonist. For as I broke down in my massive review, it's wrong for the image of Zero to be used by a mad tyrant due to the underlying compassion of the one who originally wore it, even if in this case it is one that is being brainwashed into acting this way. But in context to this scene and the escalation part of it, where the hell does that violence and fear line come from? For neither were applicable here. Callousness, yes. Without mercy, yes. But there was a running logic before Lambda pushes Richard into an action foolishly that leads to the betrayals, as others can no longer agree with how far Richard is being forced to take things. As again, Hubert was the one that was the problem here in, like his bastard of a sperm donor, refusing to listen to anyone but himself to resolve a crisis he himself was escalating. Had Hubert not acted as a final trigger, it's very likely Asbel would have been able to keep talking Richard down until the point peace were properly restored, or a proper outlet in the form of continuous strata aggression by which to force Richard's hand properly into disregarding Asbel's words on his own that makes him give in to Lambda. For in the same way that Code Geass screwed over Lelouch and this game has scapegoated Asbel, the story is now forcibly driving Richard against character to be its primary villain. Yes, he is being influenced by Lambda as said, but like everything else this does not feel like a natural progression, but an active narrative conflicting with themes and character, when from everything presented it would have been far more in character for Hubert to be the one under Lambda's sway. Yes, we would have consequently seen less overt sign of it, but more of the corruption could have been covered by Hubert's abandonment to be an entirely natural plotline. For what escalates this again is not Asbel, but Hubert himself attacking Richard, leading Richard to counter an Asbel to save his brother, which Richard treats as a final betrayal, moving to kill them both. Only for Sophie to intercede, recovering the last of her nanites from Hubert's body, and in doing so, remembering everything. But from their clash, it's made more clear by Richard's words that he is no longer in the driver's seat. it's Lambda that's fully using him as a host, one that Asbel has no hesitation against attacking. But in doing so, this is another of Asbel's legitimate mistakes, as this only serves to escalate the conflict by making what's left of Richard think that absolutely everything Lambda has been telling him is true. Richard becoming injured makes Windor sound the retreat. Launce left in Stratton hands as orders come down to Hubert to strip the land dry and leave, which suddenly he refuses to do, despite this force here not being able to fight a war on two separate fronts between Windor's army and the Fendel forces that are soon to arrive to reinforce the remains of the previous attackers, which will only escalate the death and suffering Aston and Hubert brought to their town.
少佐は本国の意向よりもラントを優先する気持ちが強いように思えてなりません。
When, again, the last skirmish in town was his fault.
そう思うのはあなたが僕をラント出身者としか見ないからとも取れますね。
Yes, he is. He's acting like a petulant brat that refuses to let go of things that aren't his because his smankhead of a dad couldn't see past his own nose, and both of them are refusing to let go. Seriously, I generally would have liked this game more had Hubert been the villain here. If there is any Code Geass character Hubert acts as allegorical to, despite being another of the cast members without a character costume, it would probably be the series' final antagonist Schneisel. Both are schemers working against the heroes of the tale to isolate them from their allies and prevent better resolutions from coming to pass, turn their opponents against them, and make those resources their own so as to maintain their own position and power. And Hubert has done that entirely at this point in the game. His refusal to negotiate in any way with Windor has ultimately made it so Asbel is a traitor to the kingdom with how Asbel saved both his life and that of Sophie from Richard. And the newly crowned king's other advisors do not understand that Richard is acting out of character, so think his lambda-infused insanity is Richard's natural state of being. Thus, Asbel attacking him, he can't go back. And Hubert has such a tight grip on Lant that the people there have no understanding that Hubert's worse than Aston in making it so harm is coming to them through either the soldiers marching on their doorstep or the outright exploitation of their resources thanks to Austin's incompetence at diplomacy. They are all going to die because they threw out the wrong brother. And they can't see it. Nor can I find empathy to care at this point about their plight because of it. So once more, all Asbel's left with is Sophie, who while she remembers everything with Asbel again, she still has many missing, or rather, locked off memories. And all of it seems important to figuring out what's affecting Richard. This is also where the game tries to force a reconciliation arc to begin between Hubert and Asbel. But because the game refuses to actually acknowledge Aston's guilt and continue Asbel's scapegoating, it fails entirely. The game refuses to not place Asbel in the wrong even when it makes sense to. Thus, I cannot accept any reformation that pretends to come because of it, as Hubert never apologizes for his own actions and makes it all about himself at all times. Even now, he's risking losing his position due to the rapidly developing situation he caused. Yet Asbel decides to step in as he's trying to de-escalate everything anyways. And a person different than Hubert might be worse. At this point, I sincerely doubt it. Yes, the people of Lon would be exploited more overtly, but it would actually make them realize how much they fucked up and Hubert was just using them to get back at Asbel.
目先の利益を追うより将来的な展望に基づいて事を運ぶ方が得だからですよ。
Oh, I don't know, you've done a fantastic job at that. Like father, like son. What gets Hubert reconsidering, however, is something that he shouldn't. For as I've said time and again, Asbel has known from the start that he would make a terrible Lord of Lant and told everyone that from childhood. And he has been time and again proven to be right. The entire reason Hubert has been wrong for the job himself thus far is he's only been considering himself and his spite, and has thus caused escalations when none needed to take place. I still want him gone, but if he'd actually kept his vendetta directed towards his father, none of this would have happened, and he more and more lacks justification for such as the story moves forward. Thus, once more, why him being possessed by Lambda would have been the better route to play this off of. But instead, the game decides to pass the book of blame towards all of Hubert's military actions, which before this point he himself had committed, off onto Hubert's stepfather, a wealthy businessman who has sway in the military, who somehow co-opted Strata's military to stage this entire action to usurp another nation's territory for personal profit. And no, he didn't become Strata's president to do it. But again, that's even more of a reason to consider Aston a horrible person, as Oswald getting Hubert is what presented as his sole leverage inside the military by which to stage such. And it was Hubert that convinces more forces and his higher-ups to stage this. So even trying to absolve Hubert of blame doesn't work here. Thus, Hubert gives him a letter to take to Strata's president, updating them of the situation to move them into proper negotiations with Windor for return of the land to its proper kingdom. But Hubert's second-in-command is also his adopted cousin, Raymond Asbel, who's been a saboteur in this operation, correctly assigning blame for why everything's gone wrong to Hubert, and his intel is why Hubert is being ousted to begin with. Learning that their plan is being thwarted by Asbel makes him take drastic measures, which happens to be taking Cheria hostage when she learns of what Asbel's doing to de-escalate the crisis. He orders Asbel turn over the letter and end his expedition to Strata in exchange for her life. He is stopped by Hubert himself, striking him down for treason. Asbel rushing off to save his oldest friend, where the two finally have it out over the big black writhing thing that's been between them since the time skip, and how horribly Cheria has treated him ever since.
だいたい再会してからずっとよそよそしい態度で。
アスベルが悪いんだから。全部アスベルが悪いんだから。
What have I been telling you all for 3 videos now? In principle, Cheria is supposed to be the Callan analog for the game in its ongoing echoes of the cast of Code Geass, being the protagonist's primary love interest. Again, this was before Sunrise's staff stupidly decided to retcon that. This was 2009, and in 2009 the intended canon love interest for the TV series was directed at being Callan Kozuki, with a purportedly tsundere attitude that refuses to meekly fall in line to someone with power, arguing with the protagonist of the tale, and acting as their sounding board in an attempt at a moral compass, ultimately looking after those in her charge, and those she has feelings for. And they entirely fail at it on all of these fronts because of what is brought most centrally into focus in this scene, though was viewable throughout everything else. And that is Cheria is exceedingly selfish and does not consider the thoughts and well-being of others' interactions and decisions when it involves her personally. We saw this in the childhood arc, especially when Asbel chewed her out for wanting to replace the family Aston took away, because she refused to understand that Asbel had to leave despite her not wanting him to. And that moment is the cornerstone of why she's treated him so badly, because he wouldn't stay for her, suffer for her, be there for her when she could not absolve what was wrong there, and from all prior evidence only made things worse for him because she didn't consider him at all and felt entitled to his time, attention, and faith. When I look at Callan from Code Geass, or other actually good depictions of tsunderes, I frequently don't see selfish characters. I see characters with deep-rooted insecurities that causes them to express said insecurities in defensive ways, them lashing out when such is poked in both major and minor ways, or when they are made exceedingly uncomfortable. The Soon side most centrally coming out when it comes to their paramours, because there is nothing that makes one feel more insecure than the possibility that someone you may like romantically may either not be the person you think they are, or may not return your affections, which can lead them to lash out in a way that can push away those that are entering their orbit too close for comfort, and comfort being a key factor of the depiction of a good tsundere. That is also why so many tsunderes amplify the most negative aspects of their paramours in their minds, to build a wall against actually acknowledging they may like them in spite of their flaws and part of that defensiveness.
Mithra.
Rex?
All in one piece? I guess if you were injured, I'd be feeling it too.
Huh? Yes. I'm okay. Huh. Was I in your lap this whole time?
It, however, becomes a problem when all that person can see is the negatives by default, for that is when such breaks down and they attack without cause, which is not acceptable. As due to insecurity being the core of the depiction of one, the only way to resolve such is to let them approach what makes them uncomfortable on their terms to overcome it, and on their own, peel away those blockades, as otherwise they'll just become more and more defensive and their well-being and relationships with others will not improve, their insecurities becoming outright berserk buttons. One of the most successful arcs in that I wish to use an example here I consider to be the character Mikoto Misaka from A Sword and Magical Index and Scientific Railgun, where she's considered the primary paramour of the character Toma Kamijo. When the two first meet, Mikoto considers Toma a rival that she can't beat, due to her own psychic power that manipulates electromagnetism being entirely negated by Toma's Imagine Breaker, which negates all supernatural phenomena it comes in contact with. Toma and Mikoto's personalities and priorities clash because of the differences in their experiences and social standing. Him teasing her, mistaken as mocking her, as the power she developed is one of the few things that is genuinely hers, and her occupation of his time not taken well due to his own financial struggles and just general misfortune. However, due to an incident involving another psychic that is slaughtering thousands of clones of her in order to evolve their own powers, which only Toma is finally able to stop, Mikoto begins to see Toma differently than she did before, wanting to spend time with him to understand him. But due to their own previous adversarial relationship, Toma always expects the worst when she nears him due to his own recurring misfortune. And Mikoto herself doesn't know how to interact with him initially without proving his misconceptions right due to how awkward seeing him has become. I think the perfect representation of this divide between them at this point is this scene from the start of Index Season 2, where Mikoto wants a moment to talk with Toma to try and clear the air on where they stand so that they can at least be friends. And yet the crisis Toma is in the middle of at that moment doesn't allow for such. Because she now wants to get closer to him, she wants Toma to listen and hear her out. And her insecurities trigger when he runs off and ignores her because he specifically did not have the time then. While this seems selfish, Toma chews her out for what she does in this moment. And then, and this is the important part, she never does it again. Because she listened to him. That's it. For she learns from it that sometimes what Toma gets involved in is as serious as what he helped her out of. So she needs to either help or get out of the way, as not everything is about her. A proper depiction of a tsundere understands this, is capable of listening and communicating even when they can end up upset by something. And the following incidents, because she listened, helped Mikoto to learn of how much of a burden Toma has laid on himself, and how badly they screw him over. A selfish person would either want them to continue suffering for ignoring or not obeying them, or do nothing to help because their inability to listen or express themselves, except belligerently, shows how little they actually do care for the other person as a person. And yet what does Mikoto end up doing when they are up against someone that can kill Toma with their bare hands and no special powers?
Why won't you just say it? That you need my help, or that you need help from someone. Just say that you feel scared or anxious. You don't even have to be specific about why. I get that you're carrying the weight of something huge inside of you. But is it absolutely necessary for you to carry it all by yourself? You look like you've been through the ringer. You even lost your memory. So what reason could you possibly have to keep doing things alone? I can fight too, you know. I'm serious. I can be of help to you.
Yeah, she pushes through her insecurities about her relationship with the guy she likes, as helping him is more important than herself or what problems she has, and expresses how deeply she wants to help. And consequently, because of that...
I can't remember who I was before. But apparently I wasn't the kind of guy who was willing to ask for help. The me that I can't remember is the one who is driving who I am now. He's still there. Maybe not up here, but here. I'm sorry, Misaka, but you should hurry up and get going. I wouldn't be able to leave it to someone else. That's not Toma Kamijo. He's not shaken by whether or not he has his memories.
There's nothing wrong with what I said. So if that's the case, it wouldn't be right to stop him. The best thing I could do is see him off from here. What now? I don't feel satisfied by that at all. Oh, that's why.
She comes to recognize and accept her true feelings for him. So those feelings are no longer an insecurity to guard against. And this comes to be reflected in all of the characters' following actions in the series to date. The next major incident involves the World War III arc, where she ends up traveling halfway across the world just to try and lighten his burden, following through in the truths of her words to try and save him at the climax of the crisis, with none of said insecurities holding her back, because she knows if she gives in to them, she could lose him for good, and ultimately fails through no fault of her own. Toma too stubborn at this point to drag anyone else down with him. The story continues on from there, but this moment is another that changes their relationship. As while her insecurities are still present, they are no longer a crutch hobbling her from wanting to be close to the guy she likes, or find ways to grow stronger so he doesn't feel he has to fight his battles alone. It having progressed in the newest volumes that she's learned to actively flirt with him without ending up a complete mess, and even compromised with her largest love rival, as the danger of what they've been thrown into has only continued to escalate. So they cannot afford to let their own egos and desires for the same guy get in the way lest they lose him entirely. And this is how one is supposed to act regarding the arc of a character with a tsundere trait. They have to overcome their insecurity to better themselves instead of continuing to use such as an excuse to lash out at others. It's actually why I appreciate many tsundere characters, as the arc can be tangibly felt as they become more freely outgoing and affectionate to the people they genuinely come to care for, as they can accept the truth of themselves more and more without fear of being rejected, paralyzing them from showcasing such. They may still have things they're defensive over, but they're not being defined by one sole character trait. That trait is instead part of a complex, multifaceted person. But it doesn't work when one is selfish, as there is no consequential impetus for them to improve or change. They just think themselves right to lash out because whatever slight against them is more important than whatever excuse they deal in kind. They use being made uncomfortable or upset as an excuse to justify retaliation. But by that point, they're no longer tsunderes. They're just being violent bitches. And that overshadows everything else about the character. It is unfortunately the consequence of the works of Rumiko Takahashi that the two definitions have gotten confused and conflated. Her characters of Akane Tendo, Lum, and to a lesser extent both Inuyasha and Kagome Higurashi have over time come to epitomize abusive behaviors towards a paramour, where minor slights are blown out of proportions for nothing more than selfishness that they then never apologize for when they go too far. As the narrative bends over backwards to justify their actions over those of their opposing number. Akane disproportionately punishing her arranged fiancé Ranma Saotome whenever they say anything negative towards her because Ranma is a blunt individual and Akane is incapable of taking constructive criticism in any form to improve her various failings. Lum attacks Ataru Moroboshi, who is depicted as wanting nothing to do with her in much of Urusei Yatsura, so when he does something she doesn't like, she gets on with zapping him and roping everyone else around them into doing what she wanted, even if it was an inconvenience for him. up until the point in the former's case he actually does become immune to all the nerve damage she's done to him, which he did not deserve to the degree he is attacked. And it all blamed on him being obstinate towards her and not giving in to her every demand. And with Inuyasha and Kagome, Inuyasha is acerbic and distrustful of others due to a litany of poor experiences, so is insecure about getting close to others again, especially because Kagome looks exactly like a girl he loved. And yet Kagome frequently refuses to have any empathy towards those feelings Inuyasha himself struggles to deal with to make it all about her. And thanks to a cursed necklace Inuyasha has stuck on him, any slight against her can result in immediate punishment. But because Inuyasha has no context to why what he did may have upset her or been wrong in a situation because Kagome just assumes he knows when he didn't, his behavior towards her and others doesn't improve as a result. And he just keeps pushing her insecurity triggers again and again until it becomes habit for her to do it in any circumstance, which makes the punishment worthless and evolves into being abusive. In all three cases, the antagonism between the purported paramours would end if they would just explain what was wrong and how one's actions harmed them. But all of them are more focused on protecting themselves and caring about only themselves that they become incapable of opening up to those who are being written as their one true loves and instead attack them. Most of Takahashi's stories inevitably fall upon the same problem of the female leads crossing the line into being violent bitches and not tsunderes. Part of this is because a lot of Takahashi's stories hinge themselves on sociopathic comedy, where the punishment is the literal punchline of a joke. But more critically, it's been viewed as being consequence of all of them being considered as creators' pet characters that don't need to improve themselves, and their deep-seated issues are just written off as quirks of the characters that can otherwise do little wrong. And because they are not characters that are viewed by the creator as being in the wrong in any situation, they're never made to apologize when they take things too far or are objectively in the wrong. So their violence towards their paramour never stops far past the point it should have, and only continues to either escalate or act as a means of selfishly controlling them. Or as Takahashi herself wrote, they're very sweet girls, but they're also violent maniacs. But that ain't a tsundere. And the belief that such abuse is justified is actually what has broken perception of her works in modern times, alongside why the character trait became so despised to the point good depictions of such were misinterpreted, as newer writers kept copying her. But those newer works lacked the elements that made the abuse fall to being part of the masquerade and not recognized for what it was. For the key to making a good tsundere character is to understand what proportionate response is. You look at characters like Rin Tosaka, and while they're defensively reactive, I struggle to think of anything from the various Fate routes where she acted out in excess of the situation. She wasn't about to punch a man into the sky or hitting them with a giant mallet summoned from Hammerspace for accidentally walking in on her. If it happened, she'd get embarrassed, cover herself, and yell at the guy who saw her to get out while being miffed at them following, as that's appropriate for the fault and informs them to not do it again.
I won't tell anyone.
If they did it deliberately without permission, then you get the justified anger and a free pass on physical violence, as then you have a valid reason to punish them, as they know clearly that something bad was done, and they should not do it again lest they be punished. But there is this frustrating point where the two wires got crossed, and the excusable attacks acting as punishment for deliberate actions got crossed with the ones for accidents, and it became harder and harder to excuse such with characters that suddenly claimed to be tsunderes, where they would lash out without cause. I cite Takahashi as the one that broke it, as there are scenes in Ranma 1/2 where Ranma is taking a bath, Akane walks in on Ranma, and somehow Ranma is in the wrong instead of her and punished for it, despite legitimately doing nothing wrong to warrant it. And yes, I have seen and read all of Ranma 1/2, even the one live-action pilot episode they did. It's admittedly been 2 decades, but I clearly remember liking the story less and less as it went on, and that pattern followed for both Inuyasha and Yorosei Yatsura to the point I despise all three's respective endings. Inuyasha's sequel series Yashahime, however, is itself mostly harmless, so I have no ill will towards that series, bar some inherited poor elements retained from its originator. And it's not like there's always an easy-to-judge line on this either. There's still a debate on whether Asbel Langley Soryu from Evangelion is a tsundere or violent bitch, because she has legitimate psychological issues born from trauma that have bred deep-set insecurities into her and isn't a completely selfish person, but she inevitably takes her self-defense actions too far for some to stomach in the anime interpretation. Whereas in the manga, she's completely balanced in this and never lashes out at all. However, her reinterpretation in the rebuild of Evangelion movies is more agreed upon to cross that threshold into being an outright bitch and being in the scapegoat the protagonist camp, because that's a big part of what broke the Evangelion movies. Another prominent example that crosses the threshold from older foundational series that sparked this entire debate was Naru Narusagawa from Love Hina, where she would punish the protagonist Keitaro for any small slight, most of which are accidents he didn't intend to fall into, which would have been resolved if she just let him explain himself. But she cares only for her own judgments of the situation, that it doesn't matter to her what is real or not, and refuses to correct her own behaviors at any point, nor does anyone else correct her when she is out of line. She for many became the poster child for disproportionate response in all this, as she is at her core just an XP of Akane Tendo, just this time written by Ken Akamatsu, as Naru has all the same character failings that Akane does. But whether such characters were of the good type or the bad type actually reached a flashpoint in the late 2000s, around the time that this game originally released, as we just got drowned in them for several consecutive years. Thanks to the vocal work of Rie Kugamiya and the popularity of her character Shana from the series Shakugan no Shana, there was a massive surge in the amount of tsundere and violent bitch characters that got depicted in stories and animation so close together that people just got sick of seeing them collectively. Both the writers and the audience no longer able to distinguish actual tsundere characters who had a load of baggage to deal with over the course of their story, or ones where the anime adopted more of the bad elements of the wrong type, thanks to how their animated form was being written, such actually factually happening with the series Familiar of Zero due to the series' bad original filler episodes, courtesy of JC Staff's adaptation team, from ones that were actually selfish and abusive to their very end for the sole reason of getting their way. I actually have seen old forum posts from the 2010s that are still out there which lump Mikoto into the bad Tsun camp, but that's because most of her arc that depicts her character development away from a deception that she is part of those who only embody the bad traits was not accessible nor had been animated at that time to show she progressed and moved beyond her insecurities to disqualify her as being a bad Tsun character, which, as I've inferred, should be better described as a violent bitch. Likewise, Callan herself has been stated in some of this discourse to be a bad tsundere character herself, but once again, if one is paying attention, she has a lot to justify why she is so angry and insecure, so she is neither a bad depiction or a violent bitch. Her home was conquered, she's forced to live a lie, she wrongly believes her mother sold her to her sperm donor just so she can be his mistress again, her brother was recently murdered and she's struggling to cope with it, the guy she comes to like refuses to be straight with her due to his own trust issues, and Goro Taniguchi was constantly sexualizing her ass, which was constantly being depicted as not being comfortable with that. All she wants is to just have the freedom to be herself and show the truth of herself to those she comes to care for. But being herself will get her killed or enslaved, so when she's not fighting for her and others' freedoms, she feels she can't trust anyone and must hide her true self. And that lack of trust and the incapability of the setting to allow herself to be honest is the root of the insecurity part of her character, which makes her classifiable as a true tsundere. And thanks to her never getting the information she needs to make better choices regarding her actions, leads her to making many bad mistakes as her acts of emotionally defending herself and of harming the people she wants to be closest to and understand, which she ends up deeply regretting once she learns the true nature of their own actions she unknowingly misjudged, and has to come to terms with how she was in the wrong. So even when she may have moments of disproportionate response, it is acknowledged she herself realizes she was in the wrong to learn from it instead of it being written off. A selfish character, however, will never admit they were in the wrong, only double down on the defenses of themselves and their actions while seeking to further attack and antagonize whoever makes them feel vulnerable. And that is what Cheria has been doing all fucking game long. Like everything else in this game, she refuses to acknowledge that any of Asbel's actions were justified, that he was being abused by his father's negligence and needed to leave lest he come to hate everything he valued, and instead made it all about herself and how she felt abandoned by him when she could have visited him in the capital at any time, but by her own admission refused to, because it would show her that Asbel was right and flourishing away from home and his bastard of a sperm donor, and she was wrong in wanting him to stay, which caused her to feel pain in the first place. She had to make him conform to how she thought of him, and he has been paying the price. She has been lashing out in retaliation while refusing to tell him all this time how he hurt her, so he could understand and apologize. Her holding on to this pain is not a sign of insecurity over being abandoned again. It's a justification to push them away and vindicate her mistreatment of him. How the fuck is that appealing?
5 ancient sages of bitchdom all gathered together one day on the peaks of Mount Bitch to proclaim your birth. And 100 years later, when all the bitch stars had aligned, you were born and made everybody's life around you a living hell because you are such a bitch!
And once again, this is the consequence of trying to constantly blame Asbel for everything he is not responsible for. You have characters whose actions become indefensible because they scapegoat him for no other reason than to hold on to the pain they should have moved on from, reevaluated, or come to terms with years and years before. Even with them having it out here, this doesn't fix anything. For she never, not once, apologizes in turn. While Cheria lacks the physical violence part of the condemned characterization, it's more than important to note that it is Asbel that is the only one she acts belligerent towards. No one else. If she were this acerbic by default, it better blend into some form of abandonment issue. But targeted like this? No. To say she doesn't get better past the point they have it out would be a lie, but this was instead the final straw for my patience with the character, as she never acknowledges her own guilt regarding what Asbel himself called out. And for a character to move forward, they do need to acknowledge what they have factually done wrong. And she has wronged Asbel. So regardless of whether Asbel would forgive her or not, she still needed to voice her regret over her treatment of him in order to properly make amends, and she never does. For there does reach a point where that apology is too little too late, and the depiction is still irreparably damaged as a result. And as a consequence, this moment trying to be their true reconciliation, it doesn't work. Like, even if I had done this with the Wii version to completely disregard the character parallels the game has with the cast and storyline of Code Geass, just considering Asbel as Asbel and Cheria as Cheria, with just perspective on this game in isolation to the events of their characters that make them analogous to others, I don't ship them. The game is trying to do this destined lovers thing with pushing them together, and yet they're not letting it be natural because of how they make the cast treat each other. They can say they care all they like, but if it's not reflected in the actions the characters perform and their motivations for them, then it's not going to connect. Asbel and Cheria's romance storyline throughout the game just came to be seen as a gigantic plot tumor to the players of the series, that refused to be handled in a way that sell their mutual feelings. And the problem is entirely coming from Cheria's expression of such, once more, due to her part in scapegoating him. Why would I want him to constantly be exposed to that for the rest of their respective natural lives? It's not often I vehemently disagree with who a series is trying to pair up, as Paramore stuff is something that has to have evidence given over time of two people liking each other to advance to that stage. But this is legitimately one of those times that I just cannot get on board it, as it's all due to the baggage the game has had. And unfortunately, we're still not even at the halfway point. Next time, we finally get to Strata.